As you start to wrap up your curriculum design process, at least what we're doing in this class for it, I thought it would be important to go ahead and include the chapter on introducing change. Because you've done all this work, I thought it would be helpful to think about how you could introduce the changes that you have recommended and developed for your curriculum design process. So first of all, what constitutes change? And probably almost everything in your curriculum design does. It could include something as small as introducing a new course book, or changing to a new approach to teaching, maybe a new philosophy of teaching. It could be introducing new teaching techniques. You could even do something as simple as, right, so every time some course book that you've already been using hits one particular section, there's a new type of technique you use when you introduce that activity. That is still a change. It could be something like changing exams. And so this has been an issue in Texas, right? Changing what types of exit exams students are using. Most of the country has been struggling with how to prepare students now for the Common Core expectations. If you change the test that students are taking, obviously it changes the expectations for what students can do. And we actually call this a bit of a washback effect. So tests have power over curriculum. You could also have some kind of change to the school system. For example, if your school suddenly went to bilingual and they were going to do half of their classes in English and half in Spanish. Maybe they've only been taking an ESL course and you've been working mostly just on language skills, but suddenly they have to be able to do science in English. Well, probably your curriculum is going to have to reflect some of these growing and changing needs. Also, it could be changing the assessment practices or the nature of the assessment. If the test itself changes, or if the school wants to change some form of testing procedure, again, we've got that washback effect, and it could impact the types of things that the curriculum is preparing students for. So, some of the early questions that you need to think about as you're completing your curriculum design. And hopefully you've designed a curriculum that people are going to want, right? However, it's important to check, is the change that you're about to propose culturally appropriate? Now, I'm not sure to what degree you're going to have trouble with that here if you're working in this region. However, ESL teachers have run into a lot of trouble when they've tried to take a really Western curriculum to countries like China. And suddenly we're pushing this whole new teaching methodology, a whole new way of seeing education, and it doesn't really jive with the rest of the school. So in those cases, schools have been more likely to reject the suggestions. And is the change really needed? For some of you, right, I noticed that in your needs analysis, you mentioned that the school has done some kind of curriculum design project. If you're proposing changes just to propose changes, you may have schools reject it because you're not proposing changes that are really needed. However, hopefully from the needs analysis, even if a curriculum design has been done, you identified areas where there still needs to be some work. In that case, hopefully you can make the argument that this change really is needed. And also, does the change have support? Hopefully, right? You talked to, most of you did. I can't think of anyone that didn't talk to some of the other teachers of this course, if there are other teachers of the course. And you got useful information about what they think would be important. If they think the change that you just recommended because they think it's important, is important, it's going to be easy to implement. So if you've lined up your needs analysis fairly well, you found important things from both the students and the teachers, perhaps the administration, you're going to be more likely to have the support for making those changes. However, even if a teacher complains about some aspect of the course, or the admin complains about something, that doesn't always mean that you have the support, because everything takes resources and time. So keep that in mind. You will also have to think about determining the size of the change that you're proposing. This, of course, impacts how successful it will be. So a couple of things to keep in mind. The change should be big enough that people see it as useful. If all you're really doing is going through and changing like formatting on lesson plans and, you know, I don't know, rearranging a couple of activities, most people are going to say, this isn't worth my time to learn a whole new system when it's pretty much the same thing. So we want it to be big enough to be useful, but not small enough to, but not so, sorry. We want it big enough to be useful, but we also want it to be small enough to not be overwhelming. Keep in mind that all of these changes you're proposing are things that teachers will have to learn. They'll have to spend time implementing. You're asking teachers to potentially put in quite a bit of new work. So keep in mind that the more changes that you make, the more overwhelming it will be for teachers. If some of the things that they were already doing get to be carried over, you're going to have an easier time than saying everything we're doing from this moment forward is brand new. You might also have to be an advocate for your curriculum design. I apologize about that, but I think we're pretty much on a roll, so we're going to keep going. So on that last point, you might have to be a bit of an advocate for your curriculum. And so you might have to do some work to show that the curriculum will be useful for students and that it can be done without overwhelming everyone. An example of showing that it'll be useful to students is the study that was conducted or mentioned in the chapter under, oh gosh, I think it was under an example where that they were looking at teachers, oh gosh, I should have marked it. The point of it is, they found out at the end of a curriculum design that one of the teachers had decided not to make any of the changes that they had requested. And at the end of the study, they found that while his group performed similarly to the control group, the new curriculum design actually produced increased learning outcomes. So maybe they didn't get that teacher on board that first semester, but one of the lessons there, I think, is that once you have some data, you certainly have a way to convince people. If they showed him that data, maybe they could get him on board for the next semester. You have all done a needs analysis, so you have something to show. You also want to make sure that you point out the ways that it can be done without taking up everyone's time. Okay, now, if you introduce a new curriculum, you may have to work to get your teachers on board. Of course, you might have to work to get admin on board as well. But some things to consider. First of all, teacher belief and teacher practice are not always the same thing. So, first of all, our curriculum design should address the needs that teachers believe are important for students. But your curriculum also needs to follow practices for good teachers. Now, one thing that we know is that from teacher training programs, often teachers know things about what should be good teaching, what research shows is good teaching. However, teachers are actually quite likely to pull from their own learning experiences. They're likely to pull from textbooks. They may have practices that are problematic. So, one thing we have to keep in mind when we're proposing these changes is that, yeah, maybe they said that they want some of these things, but they're going to require a lot of change in order to implement because they're not actually doing the things that they say are important. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. One way that we can help teachers get on board is professional development. First of all, professional developments are useful in changing beliefs. This is a great chance for you to show teachers data. right? Saying, I can help improve learning outcomes because this research says I can. Your needs analysis says that it's something that needs to be worked on. And whatever else you need to convince them that this is going to help. Professional developments are also useful in helping teachers make that transition in a less overwhelming way. So let's say you just hand them like a book, a new textbook, and a new syllabus, and you just kind of throw it all at them. They're going to be a little concerned about making all of these changes, understanding what the purpose is. So professional development can also be useful in helping teachers make those adjustments to your new curriculum. Finally, in the end, with teachers or with administration, there are a few different ways that you can push for change. The first is, of course, the most aggressive. You can work to have administration provide rules or directives to teachers that they must use certain aspects of your curriculum. A couple reasons to be concerned about this. Teachers are fairly autonomous beings. They don't really like being told exactly what they have to do, and for good reason. They have trained to do this job. And often teachers have had some training in curriculum design as well, and they know enough about designing lessons that a lot of them would feel perfectly comfortable doing some of this stuff on their own. And having something forcefully pushed at them can create some resentment. So there's some reason to be a little careful about it. However, coercive tactics are somewhat effective when you have reluctance even from the beginning. So if you have a teacher that's like, nope, I've been teaching the same way for however many years and it works fine and I'm not making changes, well, rules and directives can be somewhat useful there. However, I think it's good to start at some of your other options to see if you can get the teachers to agree, right, that your changes is necessary, it will be useful, and that they can do it. So I think it's often useful to start with reasons and explanations. This is particularly useful, of course, if you already have open channels of communication. One way of doing this is those professional development workshops that were mentioned in the previous slide. Another way of doing it, of course, is just to provide information sheets, lots of guidance on how to implement it, and talking with them, seeing what you could help them with to get it started. The final option is collaborative negotiation. So this one is a bit time intensive, and so you need a lot of people willing to really take part in this project. And what you do basically is bring people together into like a workshop type setting where you have everybody contributing ideas and you work towards ways of implementing these new ideas for curriculum. If there may be aspects they don't want to include, that could be part of the negotiation. Okay. In order to be successful over the long term, then, some of the things that will help you is, first of all, when you get a new curriculum into the school, make sure that teachers know what the end results are or what they should be. What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to make sure that maybe all of the students that came in below grade level on reading are catching up and hitting the next benchmark for the current grade level? Are we trying to get students more engaged, which maybe you could monitor just through student attentiveness, attendance rates perhaps, effort put into projects? Whatever the results that you're aiming for are, you need to make sure that teachers know what they're looking for. What is it supposed to accomplish? Then check in with teachers. How is it going? Are you having any issues? Have you noticed any changes? By checking in with teachers, you have a chance for them to, first of all, reflect. They might not always be reflecting on how lessons are going. Hopefully most of them are, but they might not have time every day to sit back and reflect on the class and how it's going. So it gives them a chance to stop and think about it. And also, if they have concerns, they can bring those up. You might even have some ideas of fixing those problems right then. And they may bring up problems that you need to address. So if things just simply aren't working, this gives you a chance to make changes. If you just continue to push the same ideas that teachers are going, this isn't working in the classroom, right? It's probably going to fail. So it gives you a chance to make those changes. All right, and if you do all of these things, hopefully over the long term, you would be able to get programs to successfully adopt the curriculum that you're proposing. Okay, that's the main heart of the ideas for the chapter this week. And what you'll be thinking about is your particular context as you work in the forum this week.